Good morning, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I appreciate you watching and taking part in your education. Thanks for joining me today. So as we get started today, just a couple of announcements. One, the holiday got me a little bit behind, kind of threw my schedule off. So I normally like to have things graded before now, but by the end of the day today, your Module 6 assignments will all be graded. I'm looking forward to going through those. Just a little behind this week, but we'll have that done by the end of the day today. Module 7 is due today, so you want to make sure you'll get those in. Module 7 material due today. And we're going to be talking about Module 8 in the stream today. So it's going to be a little lighter, a little more fun. Just making sure that we kind of understand kind of how all of this works with actually doing the things that people want to do when it comes to working with a website, and that's kind of make it look nice, right? Like everything we've done up until this point really doesn't do a whole lot for us in terms of making a good looking website. But now that we know how to do some basic styling and move some things around and set some widths and heights and use our general box model to understand how that works, we can have a little bit more fun with color. And that's going to be our main focus today, is to work with color. So that should be a good time. I asked if anybody had any questions regarding any Module 7 material prior to the stream so I could cover them in the stream. I did not get any questions. If anybody's watching live has any questions at the moment, you can go ahead and throw them in chat. As always, I'm monitoring chat, also email and Teams, if anybody's got any questions coming in. But if we don't get any Module 7 questions, right, like I posted a lot of material for Module 7 between last week's live stream and this week's, and the pre-recorded videos that I posted. So if you, if you still have any questions regarding any of that, throw them out there now. But I am, as always, monitoring the live chat, monitoring Teams, monitoring email, for any questions that we have coming in over the course of the live today. So we'll just hold for a second here, just to make sure nobody has any questions. And we will kind of review just a little bit of the material as we're kind of walking into what we're going to talk about today. So it's not a big deal there. So last week we were doing some Module 7 stuff, and we were going over box model and different things of that nature. Remember that you have access to this file, so if you want to see what my file looks like and compare it against your file, I try to do most, if not all, of the things, and then a little extra that I ask you all to do in the assignments. I try to do them in these lives just so you can see an example of them, just so they can make sense to you. But last week, one of the big things that we were doing is we were looking at how to arrange things, because up until this point, we were just kind of throwing content onto a page, and we really didn't have much that we could do with it, right? Like it was all just top to bottom. Everything was aligned over to the left, and it was all just the full width of the page. But now we're able to change the width of things. So if we look at our full site here, we can see we were able to change the width of things. There is a main that's behind all of this. We talked about this briefly last week. We said the main is a container that we can put other things inside of, that we can use to manipulate large portions of our page at once. We also have other tags that are similar to this, like section. Some of you might be familiar with the idea of a div. Right, but I just took all the content of my website that's in my body here, wrapped it in a main, and that allowed me to manipulate the whole thing at once by adding styling to my main tag. And so I used our margin trick, margin 0 auto, and set it to a width of 1024 pixels. And this will actually come in handy for us today as well, for what we're going to be doing today, having this main. In fact, I ask you to add a main like I've done here if you haven't yet in Module 8. So that's going to be something that's going to be beneficial to you to see this example of as you're doing your Module 8 labs for next week. But we looked at the different kind of selectors. We said that there are 3 types of selectors. Basic selectors in CSS. There are other different types of advanced selectors, sibling selector, and all this kind of wild stuff. But for our purposes at this point, right, we're keeping it simple, keeping it basic. And we said there are basically 3 different types of selectors: an element selector, a class selector, and an ID selector. And depending on the selector that you use to select the elements in your CSS, they all have different purposes. Right, we said the element selector selects everything of that element, and it is just the element name. Right, so in this case, my P element selector represents all of my paragraph tags that are on my page. Class selector is the next level up in specificity. And so we represent that with a period before the attribute in our CSS. Right, if we go back and we look at our attributes here, we can see inside of our first opening tag here for this paragraph, we have the class equals short attribute here. And so that's how I represent in HTML what is represented by dot short here in CSS. And so I can have as many different things with a class of something as I want, right? Like I can put this class of short on as many different paragraphs as I want to put them. In fact, let me turn off, I don't think I've turned off notifications there just so we don't get bothered with that again. But I can put the class attribute on as many elements as I want, and this class selector here will select every item with that attribute. For an ID selector here, this corresponds to the ID attribute in my HTML. So if I look at my HTML here, we can see there's my ID equals long. For an ID, we want to use one specific ID for one specific element. So if we have an ID, we want to use it one time, and that's just for something kind of special, right? And so this helps us determine specificity. Right? Elements are least specific because they cover the widest ground. Class is the next on the specificity level, and ID is the most specific, and we represented them here by points, right? And we said, okay, well, an element selector is 1 point, a class selector is 2 points, and an ID selector is 3 points, and whichever rule has the highest value of specificity gets precedence. But we can also mix and match, right? Because these paragraph rules still apply to a paragraph with an ID of long. So if I changed something in the paragraph rules that didn't have a corresponding overriding rule in my long ID here, then it would still get applied to any to a paragraph with an ID of long. Right? It's because remember that we said that all of these are rules, right? Like when we're working with CSS, we're working with rules. And our rules do different things to different elements. So you could basically say, like, you could think about it this way, right? Like everything that's a paragraph, if you have a paragraph tag selector, gets all those rules applied. Then if you have something more specific, anything that conflicts is always going to be the more specific rule value. But you still have any unconflicting rules being applied to that element. And this is why CSS is one of the more challenging things for general programmers to kind of wrap their heads around. Because a lot of it does behave differently than we're accustomed to just writing standard code. Right, and at the end, last week, just so we could see some differences in different things, we started adding color, and that's what we see here. And so that's what's going to bridge us into what we're talking about today. We started changing text color. And we changed text color here of short to blue. And we changed color here to red. And so this is our simplest color, right? So we're using color, which the color rule specifically is for text and text alone, right? So if we're just using this term color here, color is only going to impact text. That is for text color. And what we used with text color here were simple color names, red and blue. And so these values, we call them named colors, right? And I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. In CSS, and really HTML as well, there is a certain list of named colors, and we have them here. And let me turn off that little bottom bar just briefly here so you can see all of them. We have this set of colors, and I think I also have linked them out in your module as well. But these are kind of our web-safe named colors. All of these colors have names. Some of them make sense, right? Like you see red, blue, orange, dark orange, green. And some of them don't make quite as much sense, although, I used to make fun of some of the more out there names, but like all the names have a purpose. Like I think it was, it might have been Alice Blue that I was making fun of one day, and I was just like, oh yeah, what kind of name is like Alice Blue? That doesn't really tell you anything about the color. And then like somebody in the class Googled it and looked it up like while I was talking, and there was like, oh yeah, they named it after a loved one that passed away, and I'm just like, ooh, that's a lot of these color names, they make sense. They kind of put you in that mindset, but there are a few of them that are kind of strange, kind of out there, that might not, be exactly what you'd think of if you were to think of this color. For example, Gainsborough is a light gray. Like, I don't know how I would put that connection together if I was thinking about that. But with these, I can kind of, I can just kind of take the color, take any named color that I want and put it in place of red or blue there. And as long as they have a valid name in this list, then I can use it. And I can use this for color, or I can also use this for background color, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Right? These are just safe names that can be used for colors. So for example, if I wanted to take that red, maybe not use a bright red, maybe use a fire brick instead. Well, I could come in here and I can take red and I can replace it with fire brick. And that's going to give me that darker red color. All right, if I wanted something different from this blue, if I wanted something like indigo, I could replace that. Now I get that darker, deep blue, purple, indigo color. Right, so in CSS, if I'm using a named color, I can just type the name in. And so we can go ahead and set up this site if we want to with named colors. All right, so right now, the way I have this kind of set up is I have the whole page, and then I have this main section that's running down the middle. And I can take advantage of that to sort of make this look a little bit better. Right, so if I were to find my HTML element, I could also use my body element selector, BODY. So either one of these are going to work. But what I want to do is I want to apply a background color to them. So I'm going to add background dash color. And that's going to give me the ability to put a background color on an element. In this case, I'm putting it on my body element, which is going to put the background color on the entire page. So if we looked at our list of named colors, and we'll do things a little bit different. Maybe I wanted to use steel blue, right? Just something that might be kind of similar to, or maybe like Dodger blue, something that might be kind of similar to my picture here. DODGER blue, Dodger blue. Because that's similar to my the pictures, the Yeti picture here. And I run this, and I get that Dodger blue. Now, one of the things that you notice here is that when I apply the color to the entire page, things get a little bit hard to read, right? Especially when they are a different color like we see here, right? And this is because of contrast. Right, there's not as much contrast between the background and the foreground, which in turn makes things hard to read. And if we're designing a website for our users, we want to make things easier to read. But if we want to make things easier to read, and we want to make things a little bit nicer, well, the goal would be then to take our, we could change the color of all this text if we wanted to white. Like if I just on my body selector here, just added a color, white. We could do that and it would change not everything to white because there are certain things that, are not white. If I added the important modifier to it, then that could increase specificity. But there's still some issues there. Right, what's going to be easier for us though and give us the most design options is to add a background color to our main element. So it just puts, say, white behind the main. So if I find my main here and I add a background color of white to it, that's going to make main have a white background and make it automatically easier to read. And what I'd like to do, I think, is just kind of bring some colors in, make this a little more designy as we sort of go to, finishing up basically our HTML here. So if I were to look, maybe, since I'm using like a blue palette here, maybe I don't want to use red here. Maybe I'd rather use a color that's more in line with that. Something that I also might want to do here is just add a little bit of padding to my main, right? Because we can see main, we can see the text and all that kind of stuff is right up against the edge of main there. But if I wanted that to be a little bit off of the edge, I could add a little bit of padding to main. And we can add, say, 24 pixels of padding there. And if I add 24 pixels of padding there, I could subtract 48 pixels of padding here, or I could just take it down a lot lower. Right, as we were talking about last week with box model. There's also the trick that we teach you in the next level class, which is box sizing border box, which kind of breaks the idea of the box model. But since this is the basic class, we'll just kind of stick with this as it is. We can run that. That's going to get our text off of the edges. We can see that's a little bit, since we shrunk our interior box, that's a little bit too big now. So we can find our paragraph. And I'm just going to take the width out here for this, for the paragraph. So it can be full width. And that is actually hashtag long. So I want to take it out of there as well. There we go. I've got this paragraph selector up here too. That's where it's getting that 1800 from. So I need to take that out as well. And that should get me a nice contained paragraph there. So now, I mean, now you're kind of seeing basically the standard template of what we see on websites, right? Like if you look at a lot of websites, it's basically this same sort of design, right? Where you have a big page and then you have like a small strip for content down the middle. And so when you look at a lot of web pages, even complicated web pages, they have the same sort of, overall design. Like if we look at the Cleveland Community College website, like they use more backgrounds and more background colors here, but you can kind of see that there's a strip down the middle where the content is, and there's stuff off to the sides. Which gets me a similar looking design. And so if I wanted to take this fire brick red, make it something that would be more in line with the rest of the color scheme, I might want to make that a navy. For the short paragraphs here, we can make it just like a, let's go with a royal blue, just so we can have some different colors in here. And we run that, and we start to see, here's our navy, here's our royal blue, navy. Different things there, right? Looking pretty interesting. And we could even take like our long here, and we can apply a background color to it, right? So if we took our long, maybe we added a little padding to it, padding of 12 pixels. Maybe we added a background color to it. Maybe we made this one royal blue, or maybe we really wanted this to stand out. So we made it like a dark orange, which is color theory, which, you talk about in the design class typically. You talk about color theory and you talk about how things work, how different colors work together and all this kind of stuff. And so blue and orange are opposites on the color wheel. And so, if we use blue and orange together, they typically look pretty good, give you a lot of contrast. And so we see something like that. And then you could even play around with the color from here. Maybe you'd want to try white, see what white text looks like on that dark orange background. Doesn't look bad. All right, you got that link here, which you can also, mess with that a little bit. Links are anchor tag, right? So that's anchor. Typically, you would also want to use like a visited with the pseudo visited selector here, which we talk about pseudo selectors in future classes, right? A little too complex for this. But we can actually change the color of our links, and let's see if I remember the syntax for visited, because my visited syntax here is wrong. There we go. It's just 1 colon. Thought it might be. But now we have a white link that goes along with everything else. Typically, we want to make our links a different color so they stand apart and look different and look like something that we can click on. So typically, we would not do something like this, or we would do something to our link to make it look more like it's something that's clickable. So maybe we don't want to use white here, but we want to use something that would be more in the theme. So maybe if we used something like gold. Gold might not be enough contrast, but we can try it out, see what it looks like. I put it in the wrong place too. That's great. Gold goes here. And so now we can see that our link is gold, which is kind of cool. You know, you might want that even lighter, but still have a little bit of a hue to it. So maybe something like Navajo white. If I look at the named colors, Navajo white. So it's got a little bit of a color difference, a little bit more contrast. You can also see, since it's not specific, it's also changing the link that's up here about going to a new page. So the other thing that we might want to do here is we might want to change our H1s and H2s and H3s. And so one of the things that you kind of saw here, right, with my A and my A visited is if I want to write one set of rules that applies to multiple different elements, I can just separate them by commas. So H1, H2, H3, color dark orange. And that'll apply them to all of these, right? So it applies the same rules to all the different elements. You could also do that with, different IDs or different class selectors as well, right? Just gives you that nice change there. And so, I mean, these are some good examples here of a basic website. But there is one thing that we notice, right? If we look at our list of named colors again, is that we have a very small list of colors here that we can choose from, right? But one of the real tricks about all of this is that there are way more colors than this available to us. Right, so, there's like 150, 180, something like that, named colors. But there are over 16 million, almost 17 million colors that we can use that just aren't what's named there. And so that's where color codes come in particular for this class. In future classes, right, in future classes we learn RGB and we learn HSL. In this class, primarily, we focus on hexadecimal. Which is pretty fun, right? So we talked about binary before. Let's give ourselves a little screen to draw on here. We talked about binary before. Binary. And we said binary was base 2. We said that decimal right, which is our regular counting system, is base 10. So in binary, we have two numbers, 0 through 1. In decimal, we have 10 numbers, 0 through 9. But this gets us to the idea that numbers bigger than 9 don't really exist, right? Like it's just 2 places or 3 places or 4 places or however many places with the same numbers, right? Like the number 11 does not exist. It is 1 in 1's place, 1 in 10's place. And so then there's hexadecimal. And this is base 16. So this gets us to the point to where like we have more numbers that we need to represent besides 0 through 9. Right, we need 0 through 16, but 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, these numbers don't exist, right? Like it would be if we were counting in decimal. This would be 0 through 15. But 10, like we just said, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, those don't exist. Right? Those are not numbers. Those are 2 decimal numbers. So instead, we represent our numbers here from 10 to 15 as A through F. So what we're actually looking at here is a numbering system that goes from 0 to F. So it would basically be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. And so this gives us 16 characters that we can represent numbers 0 through 15 with. And this allows us to represent larger numbers in a smaller space. Which is why you've probably seen color codes like hashtag A7B139. And so that's what we're talking about here. So this is a hexadecimal RGB color. And this is actually a yellow, and we'll tell you how I know, and we'll actually see that. This is actually in the yellow family. It's a little bit darker. So it's kind of a browny yellow, but it's fairly bright, right? Like if we were looking at our color codes here, it wouldn't be like all the way in the brown area, but it would be more like a wheat color, I believe. We'll see. We'll see here in a bit. A7B139. And so what this is we want to think about this not as one code. We want to think about this as 3 smaller codes. 1, 2, 3. And these represent our red values, our green values, and our blue values. And they allow us to represent numbers from 0 to 255. So that's 0 to 255 red, 0 to 255 green, and 0 to 255 blue. And so we can kind of think about these as 3 flashlights, right? Or if you've been to like a play in a theater, And, you look up and you see the lights. There are not just white lights in the ceiling. There are red lights, there are green lights, and there are blue lights. And that's because we can take these different lights and we can mix their intensities to get different colors. Right? So if I take one flashlight and turn it on full blast, right? So like if I got my red flashlight and I turned it on full blast is FF. FF equals 255. So how do we get that value, right? We get that value because it is a hexadecimal number. And we talked about place values in, we talked about place values in doing this kind of math before. If we look at any kind of number, the first number in that, the first place in that number is always the base to the power of 0. And the second place in that number is always the base to the power of 1. So in this case, anything raised to the power of 0 is always 1. And anything raised to the power of 1 is always itself. So what we can do here is basically just take this number times 16 plus this number, and that gives us our value. So it would be 15. So if we look at FF here, it's 15 times 16 plus 15, right? Because we said that that's what F represents here is a 15. Right, so 15 times 16, that is 240. Plus 15, 255. Right, so that's how we get from FF to 255. And so you can see here that we can represent bigger numbers in smaller spaces. Right, so if we look at our A7B139 here, it's going to be A, which is 10. Right, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A. So A is 10. So that's an easy math. That's some easy math right there. 10 times 16 is 160. Plus 7 is 167. Right, so A7 is the equivalent of 167 in decimal. If we looked at B1 here, that's going to be B, which in our case here represents an 11 times 16. And so that's 176 plus 1, which is going to be a 177 on that flashlight. And our B, which is 3 times 16, which is 48, plus 9, which is 57. So that's 57. And we can think about these as the power level on our flashlight. So our red and our green power level are roughly 3/4 of the way up. Maybe a little bit lower than that, right? Like if we said like 255 divided by 4, that's 63. So yeah, it's just a little under 3/4 of the way up. Maybe 3/5 of the way up would be a better comparison. And our blue is 57. So our blue is like 1/4 of the way up. Not quite 1/4 of the way up. And so when we start to do this, we start to mix colors together. And if we mix equal parts of red and green, for example, if we mix 255 red, so that would be FF red, 255 green, FF green, and no blue, so that would be 0, 0. That's going to give us yellow. And so that's how I know that this color here is in the yellow family because it has a similar structure to full yellow, which is FFFF00. And so if we took our green value and divided it in half roughly, right? So if we said something like FF8800, well, now we have twice as much red as green, right? So we know equal parts red and green make yellow, but then we add more red to it. So this puts this in, this is orange. Right, so we just get to kind of color mixing there. If we add equal parts green and blue, so if we did something like 00, F, 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 this is cyan, and F, F, 00, FF is magenta. Hit the wrong key there, but you know, we kind of get the point. So I don't necessarily expect you all to kind of understand all of these colors right away. I'm just kind of trying to explain like the way they work. I am experienced enough with them to where I can kind of do like a little, where I can kind of do a cool little party trick where I can just see a color and just tell you a rough approximation of its hexadecimal code. Just because I've used them so much, right? Which is kind of fun, but like we can see, like if we were to, and I've written that color value down there so we can go look at something else here. If we were to look at our named colors, I would think that that color that we just did there would be probably more in this goldenrod area. You know, more toward yellow, maybe even something along the lines of dark khaki here. Maybe not quite that much, maybe regular khaki. Here, I think dark khaki is probably too low. So it'd probably be pretty close to this khaki color here. And so if we were to go into, say, Google and enter hashtag A7B139, and I just came up with this off the top of my head, we can see, yeah, it's sort of a more subdued, sort of yellow color. It is a little greeny. It's a little greenish because, you know, it did have a little more green in it. But we can also see down here in the RGB values, there are those values that we just calculated. 167, 177, and 57. Right, those are the values that we just calculated. And so, you know, if you want to find your own colors, you can just Google color picker. You can pick any color that you want. And it'll give you the hexadecimal color here that you can just copy and bring into your site. And so you just bring those in. Like if I wanted to change the paragraphs to be a different color blue, maybe something like that, I can copy that in there. And I can just paste that in here instead of navy. And it's going to work the exact same way. Now you can see that those paragraphs aren't as dark. All right, if I wanted to use a different orange instead of this dark orange, maybe I wanted something a little bit more bold. Copy that in there. Paste that in there. That in there. Now it's a darker, more bold color. And so with the last little bit of time here, I want to talk about font sizes and font types. So typically, right, you might want to use a different heading font than your body font. In this course, we talk about web-safe fonts. So we only use web-safe fonts. In future courses, we do discuss how you would use other fonts that aren't just the standard web-safe font. But typically what I might want to do is I might want to say, oh yeah, so for my headings, I might want to make that a particular web-safe font. And I believe in the course you have the list of all the web-safe fonts. There's a bunch of them. Maybe I want to make it font family Baskerville. Which Baskerville is a web-safe font. I might need to put that in quotes. Baskerville. And then if your user has that font on their machine, it's going to show up. I might not have that on my machine here, even though it is web-safe. So we might want to try something a little bit different, something like Georgia. All right, so we can see there it changed it. By default, it's going to be Times New Roman for Windows. So what you could also put is a backup, right? So if the user doesn't have, say, Georgia on their machine, you can just back up to the serif font, which when we're talking about serifs, that's all the little pointy bits that are like sticking off the T here and all that kind of stuff. So if they don't have this font on their machine, then they have this backup. Comic Sans is also an option. Like people like Comic Sans. You can also apply this to the body, right? So I could say font family. Let's say Calibri Sans Serif. And so now this is a Calibri font, and if the user didn't have Calibri on their machine, it would just default to whatever is the default for their machine, which for sans serif, right? So it doesn't have little pointy bits on it, right? So in Windows, that is Arial. On a Mac, that is Helvetica. I can change my font sizes, right? So this is where it goes back to kind of what I was talking about last week when I was talking about like, oh, we don't want to use a different heading level just because it's a different size, right? We can change all of our sizes. So if I wanted to make my H3 bigger, for example, I can make font size. I can make a font size rule for my H3 elements. And then just put a different pixel size. Let's just make it crazy big here, just so we can see the change. So our subtopic goes from being this size to being real big, right? But it still hasn't lost that utility that we talked about previously of the H3, of being, the subtopic of the subtopic, right? So we could also make this smaller. Typically, the more kind of advanced work that you do, the more you get into responsive sizing. So what I might do instead of doing all these static sizes is, doing something like here and using a responsive size that would change things relatively. We get to that in future classes, so we won't complicate things with that here. But I can make things like my H1 way bigger. So I can just say, oh, H1 make it way bigger. Font size, maybe something like 48 pixels like we had there. If I want to center text, I center text a little bit differently, right? You know, we were talking about using the margin trick last week to center an element, but text doesn't quite work the same way as elements, so I can use a text dash align to change the alignment of my text. So I can center my H1s, for example, here. And now my H1 is right there in the middle. If I want to, I can change my font size on my paragraphs to be a little bit bigger. So maybe, let's see here, where's that paragraph tag here? Font dash size. Let's go with something like 12, or no, let's make it bigger. Let's go with something like 16 pixels. Even bigger so we can see it, 18 pixels. Let's go even bigger, 21 pixels. All right, so we can see now we have nice big text here. We might want to change the size of our other things that we have here. You know, maybe our H3 goes to a 24. Maybe our H2s go to like a 36. And so now we're starting to get to something that has a little bit more style with it, right? Like we could start to see like, oh, these things are actually, you know, this actually looks more like a complete website. And we're not doing anything here really, but using the absolute basic. So let me just check something real quick. I'm going to throw up my Be Right Back screen just briefly here, just so I can check to make sure that I am getting everything covered that I want to cover here. And if I am, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Let's see here. Yep, I think we have it all covered here. So everything that you need to do in your lab assignment, we have at least one example of something similar to that done here. So I think, you know, since we're also 53 minutes into this, this would be a good point to wrap up. So if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat or send me an email or a Teams message. I am monitoring these items. So go ahead and send it in if you have any questions. We'll just hold for a minute here just in case anybody who's watching live has any questions. Also, while you're doing that, just as a brief reminder, we'll be getting your grading caught up today. All right, so everything will be graded by end of day today. I'm going to try to do it before lunchtime here. I'm going to try to do it once we get off the live stream here. But remember to refer to this code for reference, right? Refer to these live streams for reference. Now, that's one of the reasons that I record them, is that, you know, you can kind of go through them and kind of, like if you watch it live, then you can kind of go through the recording and pace yourself out and be like, okay, let me see this much again and pause it and try it out and see a little bit more and pause it and try it out. Right, that sort of thing. So we'll give it just another minute or two for questions, just in case any questions come in. All right. So with that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. If you think of any questions while, you're watching the recording, or you think of any questions later, send me an email, send me a Teams message, let me know. All right. Once again, don't forget Module 7 due today. That's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.